Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Pepis, Interim Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is novelist Bill Cheng. Cheng is a graduate of Hunter College's MFA writing program. His debut book, Southern Cross the Dog, was published in 2013. The book has been hailed as a tour de force of literary imagination that voices both the savage beauty and complex humanity of the American South. Southern Cross the Dog was just placed on the long list for the 2014 PEN Open Book Award. Cheng gave a reading at the University of Oregon on May 12, 2014, as part of the series Asian American Voices, a Collins Literary Forum, which was presented by the English department. Bill, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
Let's begin with you reading a passage from your book. Are you willing?
Sure. Happy to. This section is from the main character's father, and it's one of the few sections that's written in first person. Okay. When we were young, I called you my Etta, and we went down to the cotton fields without our clothes, falling on each other and laughing and full of young breath. And you said what you loved was my arms, how big they were, how they could wrap you up and hold you in like a little pea inside its pod. So I told you, and we'd look up at the sky, almost like we were daring it to rain. We had years together, don't forget. Years when it was just you and me, and we lived only for that warm thrumming inside each other, with no worry for what was coming or what had passed. We were outside of everything. Then time finally came and we married. I moved us down to Issaquena, where the soil was good for timber and Chatham's both to set down roots. Those early days I'd come home bone-tired from hauling timber, and you'd be waiting with the dinner all hot and the air inside our little cabin so goodly warm. But there was something, even then, I saw that wasn't right. Something in your eyes and that faraway look that you got sometimes. I remember the night we had Billy. You were in with the midwife while I was outside, my gut in my throat. I was on the porch looking out into the dark evening. It was summer and there were fireflies all around and crickets going and everything singing out the great mystery of the world. And then there was me, my feet turned to iron and the rest of me just reed brittle and terrified. There was so much in this world, and I did not know if I could measure up. The midwife came and fetched me, and I saw you lying there, tired but glowing. And she gave me this bloody, mewling thing. It was so small, I was afraid to take it, afraid that it might break somehow. But you looked at me, my Etta, and you said, "Ellis, hold your boy." And the midwife put the thing in my arms, and I knew then it was mine, that I could hold up its small weight, and I would exhaust every last drop of my blood to keep us safe. We named him William Cornelius for my father, but around us he was Billy. We worried ourselves sick. Every cry and whimper and gibbering noise would steal away our attention and fray our nerves. We would stay up nights made raw, listening to our little new thing kick and whine. In time, our boy grew up. The hair came in full and black, and his face was strong and handsome. There were days I'd drive out with my partner Skinny on the mule cart, hauling our load over to the mill. And there'd be something in the air, maybe, some smell of magnolia or the look of a shadow on the road, and I would feel a change. Feel it right in my body. I knew I was no longer the person I was. What I mean is, so much of my life had been spent as one man, as one person, and now I was more than that. And I could feel it right then, actually feel myself stretching out. Feel my fingertips spanning outward until I was like a sail, flagged out against the wind, covering you and me and our little boy, and I have no memory of who I was before. There wasn't no fear in it, and no regret, but just a very real anxiousness to see our future. And in that future came our little Robert. Robert was so much like you, quiet, full of seriousness. He'd sit alone for long hours, his thoughts zippered up inside him. He never smiled or sought attention, except from his brother, who he'd shadow dutifully all around the house. And our oldest boy took his role as an older brother seriously. He would protect him, his small, trembling bloodkin, in a way that not me nor you ever could. Where we would look at Robert and only see our little boy, Billy could see another person, someone who could be his equal. Billy would take pains to coax his brother out of himself. He'd play with him roughly, teach him to cuss, include him in that gang of young toughs that romped around the woods. And maybe that was what I had begun to fear, that Robert would be too much like his brother, too wild, too smart, too cunning. God, it works up a sting to think this, to say this. But some part of me knew how my son would die. I could feel it like a needle inside my heart when first I saw my baby boy kick in his father's arms.
Thanks so much. So let me ask you first, as you said before you read it, most of the book is written in the third person, and there's just a few passages, the epilogue, the prologue, this chapter, and Dora's chapter. What is it about these particular chapters that demands to be written in the first person?
Well, the prologue and the epilogue are owned by Robert, and that works in the first person because it helps center the novel. It tells you what the story is about. There's so much going on that having these bookends really guides the reader into the narrative that I want for them. Dora is her voice. I think actually her voice was that chapter exists partly because of my own personal ambition, in the sense that if someone like me were to write a book like this, the hardest thing for me to do would be to write from the perspective of a young black Southern girl from Mississippi. And I thought, if I can carry this off, right, if I can sort of pull this off, then maybe this book has a shot of being okay. And with Ellis's chapter, the chapter I just read, that was a fairly late addition to the book, and I added it because I don't believe there's a lot of vulnerability in the book, and I think it needed that. It needed that sort of emotional, not so much a center, but a kind of core that would sort of the rest of the events can sort of hang on.
So in speaking about Dora, you said it was a kind of personal challenge. If someone like you said, could write about a young African-American girl in the Deep South, then this book could be worth something. What inspired you? You're from Queens, you're an Asian American, to write a book about African Americans in Mississippi?
Well, I think it's tough to ask writers. It's tough to frame the question in terms of what a book is about for writers in particular, just because we have like 6 different answers you want to say at the same time, and they sort of, and yet all those answers would be incorrect, right? It's just some weird nuance level between all of them. But the sort of motivating factor to write this book, it's my first book, my first attempt at a novel. I'd only been writing short stories before, and I had started it in grad school, and I wanted to write a blues novel, right? By which I mean a novel that sort of celebrates that really focuses in on what I think is valuable about blues music, and for a variety of reasons, but first of which is that it has to sort of maintain your interest for however long it takes to write a novel. And I knew blues is something that I've been going back to for most of my life, so I knew that wouldn't be a problem. And the other thing is that I feel like, and this is a little corny to say, but I feel like blues has given me so much that it would just seem right for me to give my first book to the blues.
So can you tell us a little bit about the title of the book? Where does the title come from? What does the title mean?
Sure, it's title is Southern Crossed Dog, and there was W.C. Handy had written a song called The Yellow Dog Blues, which he'd in turn taken from hearing a black itinerant musician singing about going where the Southern crosses the Yellow Dog, which is a reference to a geographical location in Mississippi. It's slipping my mind right now. In Moorhead, Mississippi, where 2 railroad lines, the U.S. Southern and the Yazoo Delta, the YD line, would cross. And locals, when they see the YD line cross, they see the initials YD and would refer to it as the yellow dog. And so, it became known as the dog, and it sort of appeared over the course of different blues songs and even rock songs, that sort of thing.
So, Robert, your protagonist, he has this recurrent vision that there is a dog that dogs him. Tell me about that dog. What is that dog? Where did that dog come from?
I get asked about the dog a lot, and people keep asking because I never really give a definitive answer. It's that fulcrum point, right, for the book, right, where the book is trying to exist in both the world of the psychological, right, where the dog represents, Winston Churchill used to refer to his depression as the black dog, I think. So there's sort of the sort of mental distress that Robert is feeling, right? But there's also the world of the supernatural, right, in which a lot of blues folklore is based around this idea of there's a practice of hoodoo and having practices that would increase your fortunes or would put a hex on someone else. And so I really wanted the dog to exist in both these worlds as both something that can be interpreted as a psychological malady for Robert, but also this sort of bigger than life danger that it comes to embody this feeling of being unable to escape your fate. So that's what it's supposed to do in the book.
So forces bigger than you, there's a kind of fated quality Robert has, and this, as you imply, this is not at all uncommon in the blues. The novel begins with this historical event, this traumatizing, horrible event, the flood of 1927. Why did you want to locate it so precisely in history around that particular catastrophic event?
It's, when I was writing the book, I really didn't think of the flood as I didn't think of it as something that would run through the book. I didn't think of it as a backbone or a spine. It was just one of those things that I would locate and see again and again in blues music, and I thought, if I'm going to write a tribute to the blues, I'm going to have to use this iconography that already exists. Once I put the flood in, though, it seemed to fit that that sense of largeness, the sense of that your life is only this much and all the circumstances around it are, this much. And it has a certain violence to it, a certain there's a biblical aspect to it. But really, I wouldn't have written about the flood if all the blues singers didn't sing about the flood,
You've already spoken about repeatedly that key role that the blues played in inspiring the novel. Many of the very positive reviews that the book has gotten also call it a work of Southern Gothic fiction. Do you also see it as following in that tradition of Faulkner and O'Connor and Cormac McCarthy?
I don't. Here's the thing. I don't. But I have difficulty. I'm not a well-read person, right? I'm not super. I know who I like. I know who I like to read, and I know there are people who are much smarter and more well-read than I am. So my concept of what Southern Gothic is very limited. That being said, I don't think of this as a Southern novel because I don't think that the sort of conditions and the ideas behind it are innately Southern.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like these are sort of feelings that are at least natural to all Americans, if not all people, right? And it's just set in the South, right? And it has this fatalistic worldview just because I like writing with a fatalistic worldview. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but of course, like Faulkner. Like okay, if you want to talk about like Southern Gothic, like these are writers that have an influence outside of that region, right? Like writers like Faulkner influence, people throughout, writers throughout the country and throughout the world. So it's hard to say that I come from a tradition of Southern Gothic without also acknowledging that I come from a tradition of everything that I've ever read, and that if that every writer who reads is in some way influenced by any writer that's lived before, even if it's only by degrees, right? Because it's all trending in a certain direction as we move forward. Yeah, and I was at the Tennessee Williams festival, and moderator George Bishop asked me if I consider myself a Southern writer, and it really baffled me to even think of myself as a Southern writer because I'm not Southern. And even I think of myself as an Asian American writer is also a difficulty for me, because although I am Asian American, I'm still trying to figure out what that means, right? My identity is only built out of my own personal experience, and in finding a way to sort of connect that with the experiences of other people is work that still needs to be done.
I understand. You've cited as one of your ideals as an author the advice that you were given by the novelist Colm McCann, with whom you studied, that writers have to be unafraid. Why is that ideal important to you?
Because I think that, okay, let's be specific in terms of what I mean by being unafraid. If we believe that telling stories is an art, which it may or may not be, but if we believe that, we also have to believe that the limits that we set on what we allow ourselves to do can only hurt whatever sort of artistic integrity exists. So to be unafraid means to be not throw caution to the wind, but to be able to express yourself in the way that you instinctively want to, right? That being said, it's very easy to say that for your first novel, right? For your first work, your first sort of offering into a public space, because no one was looking before, right? I still believe it's a virtue to be unafraid, but the practicality of it is not impossible, but more difficult than I originally thought. Because this stuff doesn't exist in a vacuum as much as we want it to, as much as we want to pretend or believe that, the universe is a just place and a fair place and everything is judged based on its merit. It isn't, right? We have to think about, who tells whose stories, right? What the effect of that is, and what we want for this field, for this sort of practice, for this. I mean, it's really like for me, it's almost like a religion, right? It's a way to sort of interact with and understand the world. And we have to sort of be careful about what we're pushing forward, right, in order to do that in a way that's meaningful.
It seems like you may be alluding to the kind of debate that's broken out in response to the book. On the one hand, there are people that are saying it's a great book because it shows that great writers don't only need to write about their own personal experience. They don't need to, African Americans don't need to always write about African Americans. Men don't always need to write about men. Women don't always need to write about women. And then there are other people that are questioning, right, the authenticity of this because you're not a Southerner, you're not African American. And then there's like a sort of third level, which is like writing about the debate, this debate and the terms of the debate. Did you anticipate that your book would sort of provoke this kind of argument or this kind of discussion? And what do you think about it? What's it like to be a young writer in the middle of this kind of critical firestorm? I don't know if firestorms, critical things are ever firestorms, but tempest in a teapot, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because I know what I believe and I know what I think is valuable, but expressing that in English, right, or which is the only language I know, but putting it into words in a weird way makes it kind of degrade faster, right? Now, I believe that yes, absolutely, like I said before, writers should be unafraid. They should sort of pursue the things that make them curious, that make them sort of obsessed, that they're in love with, and they need to sort of they have the right, quote unquote, the right to do this, right? That being said, this doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like if you're going to do it and you're going to do it in a public space, I mean, it's a position of privilege to be able to sell a book, right? To publish a book and sell a book is a position of privilege. And what goes with that privilege is you have to also be responsible for it, right? So you have to be willing to, if your book is exploitative, you have to say, like, that's like, you have to acknowledge that, right? You have to sort of say that what we do, even if it's art, also has practical implications for people who read it, for people who are trying to write similar books or books that also come from that region or come from that sort of demographic place. You mentioned authenticity, and that is one thing I still feel confident about as nonsense. Like, I should be careful. There's a difference. I'm making this distinction in my mind between authenticity and authority. Authenticity doesn't exist, right? Like, we are constructing worlds out of language, and in so doing, as much as we can do with that, and it's a lot, there's also certain things that we like. The process of walking down a street, the experience of walking down a street, is not one-to-one translatable in language yet, as far as I know. Maybe it can be done. So authenticity, in the way that people mean it, doesn't ever really exist. What does exist is authority, our willingness to believe a thing. And I think that comes from research, a willingness to apply imagination and human curiosity into it. But I think more than that, the reader has to come to it themselves. They have to give the text authority. They need to be complicit in this, or else the reading experience just doesn't work.
You mentioned research. Tell us a little bit about your research that you did for this book.
Sure. Did a lot. Here's the interesting thing I want to say about research, is that no matter how much research you do, it never feels like enough, because at some point, at some level, there is some amount that you have to make up, right? So here's, I started it when I was in grad school, so I had access to Hunter's databases and libraries. I started researching the book before I even knew I had a book, because I just like to read about the blues. So I read Elijah Wald's book about Robert Johnson. I read Alan Lomax's book and John Work's book about their field research for the Library of Congress. And that was before the book. And then as I was working on the book, I read Dave Honeyboy Edwards' memoir, The World Don't Owe Me Nothing. And it's him retelling the story of his life. And so that was great in terms of capturing cadences and sounds and things like that. So there's certainly that part of it, right? And then there's, I I was in a class earlier today, and I can't stress how great Google Maps is. Just because if you've never been to a place, you still need to, and you want to see the place, you can just see it. It's just there for you. You know, I think that's great. It would be dishonest of me to say that it didn't play a role for me. But I also did some like I read this weird book on capital projects, on how to prepare explosives and things like that. I remember photocopying this page from the library about the price of eggs. I was trying to figure out the price of a prostitute back in the turn of the century. I thought, okay, well, how many eggs is a prostitute worth? And then trying to figure that out. Obviously, and so all this stuff doesn't get into the book. I sent away for a transcript of they were doing a lock and dam project in Missouri, I think, and so I sent away for the they were doing an oral history, so for the transcripts and then also for the blueprints and stuff. I even went so far as to contact the author, and in the end, I just didn't use any of it. Right? It was just a way to. It was a way to build confidence, and also to sort of track where my interests were, right? Because if you look at the path that your research is taking, you're getting some insight as to what you want the book to be. So even the questions, if you look at the questions that you ask, you're in some way trying to figure out the questions that the book is trying to answer. So.
Very interesting. Well, you've given us a real insight into that process. We have like 20 seconds left, so one final thing, very brief answer. What have you read recently that you would recommend?
Oh God, so much.
Choose one.
Can I choose two?
Fast.
Phil Kleight, Redeployment, Kiese Layman, How to Slowly Kill Yourselves and Others in America.
Okay, viewers, take those advice, those recommendations. We've been speaking with Bill Cheng. It's been really good speaking with you. Cheng gave a reading at the University of Oregon on May 12, 2014, as part of the series Asian American Voices, a Collins Literary Forum, which was presented by the English department. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thanks for watching.